Hello, my oodles and noodles. We are backeth for another episode of Jason's Life with books and sometimes anime. But today it's books. Bookies, lovely bookies. I have been AWOL for 2 weeks, as usual. Life, my friends, life takes up all your time, which is very unfair. You know, just surviving as a human. You gotta wake up, you gotta pee, you gotta brush your teeth, you gotta clean. Cleaning can be very cathartic. It can be very relaxing, but when you start realizing that no matter how much you clean is dirty again the next day, even when you live pretty minimalist like I do, it's exhausting, it bogs you down. Luckily, we have lovely stories to keep us motivated, to keep us going in this hectic world, which is just noisy and there's just all these distractions, but we can focus in, we can dive deep into a good story and forget about everything else and just really enjoy a new world. And today I wanted to talk about book 1, the Lamplighter series, Foundling. It is sometimes released, I believe, as Monster Blood Tattoo. I think that was in the UK or something like that. That's maybe where it originally came from. Anyway, I didn't research that enough. It's not that important. Foundling, Monster Blood Tattoo. It is the first book. Forgot how to speak for a second. It is the first book in a 3-book series, and we are following the story of a young boy by the name of Rosamund. And of course, in this world, just like today's world, 2021, doesn't matter how much we all have access to all the accumulated knowledge of the human species, if a boy's name is Rosamund, he's going to get made fun of. So this book sort of starts in that vein where we're being introduced to this young boy who lives in an orphanage. He lives in a place where they take care of orphan boys and girls and raise them up generally to go work in the Navy and help out the military. And sometimes they go into other fields, but that's primarily what they're being trained to do. So they do get trained in navigation, in charting, in weapons fighting, and how to use weaponry, and pretty much everything. So that's a pretty interesting, I think, different take on most fantasy stories. Most fantasy stories typically start in one of two ways. Either it's a boy or girl and they're like in a village or they're always in a small place. It's very rare that they're like in a city or anything like that. They're always in a little town or a little village. It's pretty quiet, and then some shit happens and then boof. Okay? Or it's more of a modern day telling and the person just whatever, they're at school, or I don't know. Most fantasy stories always start off the same way. It's always just someone and something happens to them and it's glorious. It doesn't start like that with this series. We are basically really kind of thrown into the world because our boy Rosamund is hired off to go be a lamplighter. And lamplighters are basically responsible in this world for walking the roads and lighting lamps. And that sounds pretty boring until you realize that within this world, within this landscape that D.M Cornishs, the author, has created, monsters are very real. And they're not monsters like, oh, there's a lot of like evil creatures out there. It's not like a goblin or something like that. It is really this monster society that actually exists out. And some are pretty typical, actually ghouls and whatnot, but others are very sentient and they're alive. And as you slowly go through the story, you start realizing that some of them are quite intelligent and that there's structure and hierarchy. You get little bits and pieces of the fact that there's this larger monster world out there, and there's some kind of connection with Rosamund. And Rosamund is basically this innocent, gentle little boy who really likes to read and learn, but he wants adventure. And so you're kind of seeing these two aspects of him. And from the moment he leaves his orphanage up until he gets to where he's actually supposed to go within this first book, it is just one shit show after another. Everything he's supposed to be doing goes wrong, and it's done pretty well. This is, I would consider, more of a YA book. It is quite old. I don't know what year this was released in. When were you released, my young friend? When? it's always impossible to find the year on these things. It's like, I can't even, 2006, okay. That's not so bad. 2006 still feels like a lifetime ago. God, 2006. I just left high school a year after. Oh, I'm so old now. But yeah, so it is a primarily for young adult novel, but it's got quite a bit of violence inside of it. There is a lot of focus on murder and philosophy and trying to really figure out why humans and monsters are fighting in the first place. You're not really fully delving into it yet in the first book, but you're kind of seeing it through the perspective of Rosamund, who, as such a gentle person, doesn't really understand why people are killing monsters and monsters are killing humans. He doesn't get it. And the world really is where this shines. It's sort of a Victorian steampunk mishmash. I don't even know how to really describe it. It's just a really, really fascinating world. And D.M Cornishs, he took a lot of time to actually kind of flesh out all the details of every single aspect of the world. The armor, the weaponry, the clothing, like everything is fleshed out. The different kinds of ships, how the monsters are. There's this whole compendium in the back of the book that's actually just super interesting to read through as you go through all the terminologies and all the different things that exist within the world. And it makes you really excited after you read that to get to book 2 and book 3, because you really want to see, okay, how is this going to be fleshed out even more? So we have a pretty solid YA story base of just this young boy who's going out into the world, and there's something special about him, but really you don't know what it is by the end of book 1. There's little hints dropped, but nothing clear enough that I think most people would be able to figure out who Rosamund is really. But it's enough of a nice little foreshadowing that you want to know what's happening in book 2. The action is pretty interesting. You got some pretty decent fight scenes. I mean, overall, it is a YA novel. There's not a huge amount happening, and most of the fighting is not happening from Rosamund's perspective. It's happening from the people who he meets along his journey. I don't really want to spoil too much of that, but there is a whole cadre of special people with abilities within this world that are done through surgeries and modifications of the body that give people certain powers. Not magical in nature, it's more scientific, and it adds a really nice depth to kind of it feels a little bit like a game in a certain sense. There's kind of these classes of things you can be. Certain kinds of warrior classes and certain kinds of, I guess you could call them, I don't want to call it a hunter per se, I don't even know what to call it. Anyway, there's lots of interesting stuff. I really don't want to say the abilities because it's one of the most fun things to kind of like find out within the story. But there's these great kind of cool abilities, and then there's some normal stuff which I don't mind ruining. There's a whole class of people who are basically, you could say, potion masters. They basically learn how to mix and match different chemicals and plants, and they can use them for healing, but a lot of them actually use them to fight monsters, which is really, really interesting, to ward them off, to lead them astray, to hurt them. And these people are basically, in a certain sense, the monster hunters of the world, although the other classes of people who get modifications done to them do have like a reputation. They're pretty much there to kill and fight monsters. But they're called skulls. The potion people are really more of the, I guess, base of the society in terms of dealing. Even when you're learning about their history, you get little bits and pieces because Rosamund is reading up on it. You know that it was the skulls that were fighting back against the monsters in the olden times and during the wars and whatnot. Because in this society, really at this point, people are not really at war with the monsters anymore, but you know that there used to be big ass wars. And now we're kind of in a peaceful limbo, but shit's taken off. You don't really hear about it that much. Like if I could say one great bonus, to this book is that it manages to foreshadow without really foreshadowing. You know stuff's happening, but you never really get like, oh, really big stuff is going to happen, because it's so tight. It's so centrally focused on Rosamund and just his emotional journey as he's trying to figure this stuff out. So it's got a nice mix. You've got this really interesting backdrop of this world and all the different kinds of people and monsters and creatures that you know are going to be fleshed out and more interesting in book 2 and book 3, while simultaneously the book still hyper focuses on just its main character. It doesn't get you distracted by other people. Even when Rosamund meets other people and starts having a little group around him, it's always primarily focused on him. There's not 50 million points of view, and that's really comforting sometimes. In fantasy, especially these days, there is kind of a push in, I suppose, traditional or epic fantasy to have 16 different points of view, which can be nice sometimes, but many times it's also just exhausting. And even in more modern type style books, you still have 3, 4, 5 different perspectives, or even when you have one, there's just too many characters around them, and it gets a little bit, you don't know who to focus on. Whereas this one stays really, really, really linear, I suppose you could say, and just you follow along this path, and it's great. It's a really relaxing book to work through, because it's, how many pages are you, buddy? How many pages? Where are we? Oh, about 300 pages, and it's pretty quick to go through. Like they're not heavy pages, so you can blow through this in a day, 2 days easily. I mean, it's a really nice series that you can kind of go through, and the series does get bigger as it goes along. Like book 2 is a little bit larger, book 3 is a little bit larger than that, so it builds up nicely and really fleshes out the story. So I would definitely recommend checking this out. I don't feel like people talk about Foundling enough, because I've only seen reviews of book 1. I don't even see people talking about book 2 and book 3. I have read them. I'm going to reread them now so I can really like refresh it in my head and then discuss it. But my biggest gripe, I remember at the end of this series, was, oh my god, I want more. I just wanted more. There was so much there, and the author unfortunately didn't continue it, which was very, very sad to me. But this book series won a lot of awards in different ways, and so it is really, really good. I would recommend checking it out. I'd give it easily, in terms of like a YA book, 7.5, 8 on 10. I mean, depending on, from a world building perspective, solid 8 on 10. Character development, I would give it a 7, 7.5 at least for book 1, but it's still just really, really enjoyable. The world building and just the way the people are shown is just so different and so pleasant comparatively to what we see in most books, that I 100% recommend checking it out. So Foundling, or Monster Blood Tattoo, depending on which version you have, part 1. Check it out. Let me know what you think down below. I am really, really hot. It's so humid today. Gotta turn my fan on, but I can't turn it on while I'm playing the video, because obviously it sounds like, which is not nice. It's not pleasant. So thanks for checking us out. Us, the royal us, as always. There are many within this mind. It's scary up there, people. You don't trust me. This is better. You don't want to get to know what's up there. Okay, toodles.